Today we're going to go over Unit 1, Lesson 14. You will need your practice book, which is the book with the monkey on it. Turn to page 41 to follow along with this video. Make sure you have that open and ready to go. Pause this video until you're ready, then press play. Now that you have your page open, your practice book open to page 41, today we're going to be focusing on bridges, particularly 4 famous bridges in the United States and in China. Let's just read the top together here. It says, bridges are structures that are built to get over obstacles like water, a valley, or roads. Bridges can be made of concrete, steel, or even tree roots. Engineers and designers do a lot of math to be sure a bridge will stand up to its use and the forces of nature that affect it. Let's consider the data in the table below. Now, when I say the word data, what I really mean is the numbers that are being collected. So a group of numbers, and in this case, it's all of this data here. The length over water of these bridges, okay? Now, I'm going to try and pronounce these bridges, but I'm sure they're pronounced incorrectly. Just go along with me. So this data table first is talking about the length of bridges, and it lists 4 bridges. The Manchac Swamp Bridge, the Hangzhou Bay Bridge, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway, a causeway is another name for a bridge, and the Jiaozhou Bay Bridge in China. It's important to make sure you clearly and carefully read the data table to make sure you know what you're talking about and the data that's being displayed. It says here that these numbers represent the length over water. So I've got 121,440 is the length over water that the Manchac Bridge is going over. Before we use this data table to make a bar graph, I want to just talk to you about bar graphs. Bar graphs have to have certain things to make sure that people know what they're talking about and what they're showing them. The first thing that a good bar graph should always have is a title. The title tells you what the bar graph is about, and when you guys are creating a bar graph, it's very important that you include a title. Our bar graph is about Mrs. Holly's class favorite colors. The next thing you want to make sure to have are 2 labels. First, a label for the vertical line going up and down, and then a label for the horizontal line going side to side. The labels on my graph here are telling me the number of students and colors. These labels represent what each line is standing for. You can tell when I'm talking about the number of students that I have a scale. The scale is the numbers that I'm counting up by. And in this case, I'm counting up by equal intervals of 2. It's very important that if you decide to skip count or skip numbers to count, that you skip count by the same number. In this case, I'm counting up by 2s. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, and 18. It wouldn't make sense if I was counting up by 2s and then just decided to count up by 5s. We have to make sure that our scale is consistent and our intervals are always the same once we just decide what to count by. Now let's talk about the label of the colors. I've given students a couple color choices, and these color choices are called the categories that I allowed students to choose from. I told them that they could choose salmon, mint green, aqua, lemon, or sunset. It's important that you have a general label and also a category for each one of your bar graphs. Our bar graph today is going up and down, meaning the bars on our graph start at 0 and go up towards the sky. Some bar graphs go side to side, like this, where the bars are going left to right. We'll have an example of that later on. The last thing that you need in a bar graph are the bars. These things here are your bars. And you can tell I can get the information from this bar graph by looking at the bars. I can see that 4 students preferred salmon. And 16 students preferred sunset. So when you guys are creating a bar graph, the things that I'm looking for are a clear title, what your bar graph is about, labels for both the vertical and the horizontal lines, a scale that counts up by equal intervals, by 2s, by 5s. Sometimes if you're talking about years, it could be by hundreds or thousands. You also need to clearly identify the categories of each bar. So, in my case, I had the 5 different bars. That's a brief overview of what you need to create a good bar graph. Let's get back to the practice book now. Now that we've reviewed what all good bar graphs have, let's set up this bar graph here. This bar graph I want us to create with bars that are going from side to side or horizontally. This is called a horizontal bar graph, whereas the bar graph in the last picture was a vertical bar graph, meaning the bars went up and down. The first thing that I need to add is my title. Pause this video and add what you think the title of this bar graph is going to be. Remember, we are using the data that's found in this table. Now that you've put that title on your bar graph, hopefully you decided that lengths of bridges should be our title. If you decided that, you're correct. Lengths of bridges. If not, erase what you wrote for the title and rewrite it so that you have lengths of bridges. The next thing we need to talk about is our scale, and I want to do our scale together. Our scale is going to be represented here. Now, when I'm doing a scale, normally I start at 0, so I want you guys to put a teeny tiny little 0 here. But you might notice that I have this little zigzag here. Now, in our last slide, I talked about how important it is to count up by the same intervals, and I counted up by 10s. However, I'm going to skip some numbers, and when I skip some numbers, I want to make sure that I don't have a huge ginormous gap between 0 and the first number that I represent. So, because the length of my bridges is so big, I'm going to skip up to 110,000, okay? That will give me a good amount to get started with. So let's write at our very first line here, 110,000. Now that I have 110,000 labeled, I want to be counting up by 5s all the way up to the beginning, or I should say 5,000s, all the way up to the rest of my lines. So I'll get you started here, and then you can pause the video and finish up. If I'm counting up by 5,000s, my next number is going to be 1,115,000. My next number is 1,020. So 120,000. Notice I'm counting up by 5s each time so that my intervals are the same. 125,000. Okay? Finish labeling the intervals counting up by 5s each time. Once you've done that, press play and see how you did. How did you do on the rest of your scales? Check your work and make sure. You should have 130,000, 135,000, 140,000, and 145,000. If you don't have that, make sure that you pause this video and make sure that your scale is accurate. Now, I need to label my scale. I'm going to be counting up in lengths over water in feet. So I'm actually going to make that my label for my scale. So lengths, or length over water, in feet. Now I'm done with my x-axis here, and I want to move on to my y-axis. I'm going to need a label for this y-axis, and that's going to be my bridges. Oops, DG. Silly Mrs. Holly. DGES. Now that you've labeled your bridges, I want you to add in each one of the bridges for the categories. So you've got the Montauk Bridge, the Hangzhou Bridge, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway, and the Jiahouse Bridge. You're going to put those right here. Let's do the first one together. The Montauk Swamp Bridge. Pause this video and finish labeling the other 3 bridges. Check to see that you labeled your bridges correctly. If you have, let's start on the fun part of our graph, which is drawing the bars. Let's look at the Montauk Swamp Bridge. Its length over water is 121,440 feet. I'm going to choose a pretty color, so I'm going to choose green, and I'm going to create a bar that goes to 121,440 feet. I see that I have 120 here and 125 here. 121,440 is awfully specific, but I know that 121 is very close to 120. So when I'm drawing my bridge, or my bar, I'm going to make that line where I think maybe 121 might be. Then I'm carefully going to construct my bar. Then I'm going to color it in nice and neat. My next bridge is the Hangzhou Bay Bridge, and that was 117,057. 117 is going to be between 115, 115 and 120. 115, 16, 17. I'm going to draw my bar in red this time, and I'm going to make it between the 115 and the 120. I've completed 2 of the bars for this graph. For the rest of today, what I would like you to do is finish the bars for the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway and the Jiahouse Bay Bridge. I'm going to be checking tomorrow to make sure that everything that I have written, you've also written on your page. Great work today.